I wish to acknowledge the Darkinjung people as traditional custodians on the land on which I live and work. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and recognise their continuing connection and contribution to the land.
Immunisation Foundation of Australia. Supporting immunisation, saving lives.
The Immunisation Foundation
of Australia is a non-profit working to save lives through education and advocacy for vaccine prevention of disease. Welcome to Matter of Vax. I'm your host, Steph O'Connell. Join me and find out what is Matter of Vax. Pneumococcal and meningococcal. These two bacterial diseases are among the most dangerous in our communities. What are they? Where do they come from? And how should we fight? We speak to Professor Robert Booy and ask why these diseases are so dangerous. Professor Robert Booy was until 2 years ago an NHMRC practitioner fellow focusing on vaccine preventable diseases. He has published 350 times in medical scientific literature, especially in influenza, respiratory viral diseases, invasive bacterial diseases, pneumococcus and meningococcus. In the last 3 years alone, done 3,000 media interviews pro bono publico on infectious diseases. Robert sits comfortably and expertly across multiple scientific and medical disciplines, and he's a go-to person for accurate and intelligible communication on infectious diseases. He's an epidemiologist. He is also an infectious diseases physician. Please welcome Professor Robert Booy.
Steph, it's really good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you here, Robert. So let's start with pneumococcal. Professor, tell us, what is it, why is it so dangerous, and how do we recognise the symptoms?
Well, pneumococcal is caused by a bacterium that especially affects the lungs, but is carried in your throat, often very innocently without causing trouble. It can cause simple infections, but what we really worry about is when it invades from a commensal, a colonist in the throat, into the bloodstream, and it can cause a number of nasty things, pneumonia, but also meningitis and also septicemia, infect blood. All of them are dangerous. They can put you definitely into hospital and may also be deadly. Pneumococcal is one of the big three causes of meningitis and pneumonia. We've been developing vaccines for it for almost a century, and we've developed better vaccines now. We just need to get better access for people who are at high risk to be vaccinated and to be protected.
Vaccination is a big key to controlling this in the community. How does it work and who should be vaccinated?
Vaccination has been around for a couple of centuries now. It simply comes from the word vaccae in Latin, which means cow, because they developed from cowpox a vaccine against smallpox. How it works is that you get a little bit of a foreign germ, perhaps something from its coating, its capsule. You purify that, and then you make it into a vaccine which stimulates the immune system, sometimes by combining it with a protein which improves its immunogenicity. It means that humans can make better and more protective antibodies, even better than they can make themselves. And that's why we can vaccinate children from 2 months of age against pneumococcal disease and get strong protection, even though natural immunity wouldn't protect. And it aims to prevent disease before it ever happens.
You're a passionate advocate for meningococcal. You've been a driving force for 30 years on the subject, and tragically every year it still hits the headlines. It's fast moving, and if you suspect that someone has it, you must act fast. Why is it so dangerous? And importantly, how do we recognise it?
Meningococcal disease is caused by a germ, a bacterium, that often sits quietly in the throat of the colonist. But when it invades, it can be really nasty. It can lead to blood poisoning. It can lead to meningitis. Meningococcal disease can be so rapid. You can go from being well at breakfast and almost dead by dinner. It's seriously that fast. I've been involved in the clinical care of hundreds of children with this disease, and it's amazing how rapidly it can evolve. You can get gangrene of the hands and feet in some cases. You can get a severe meningitis that can lead to rapid death. It really is important to recognise it in its early stages so you can treat it, but even more important to prevent it. There are a number of vaccines against meningococcal disease. We have a routine one which protects against 4 different types. They're called serogroups A, C, Y, W. It's given to children at a year of age and again at 14 years, given under the National Immunisation Program, because both of those age groups are at increased risk of serious disease. There are 2 times in your life when you're especially at risk, when you're a baby or an infant, and then when you're an older teenager or early 20s. There is one serogroup of meningococci called B, and I call it B for babies because it especially affects babies and young children, but it can also affect teenagers. Right now in Australia, the rate of disease from B is 4 times higher than the combination of the other 4, ACYW combined. It really is a foe which is causing trouble because we don't yet have a routine vaccination for everyone who's at risk in Australia. We do, however, implement the B vaccine for Indigenous infants and teenagers. They are being vaccinated routinely and for free, and that's a real advance which started 2 years ago. It just so happens that meningococcal B vaccination is recommended for all infants and children, but the government hasn't funded it for all. It's only funding it for children who are from an Indigenous background. If we are to properly control meningococcal B, we need a routine vaccination against it from 2 months of age for all infants.
So do you think we're doing enough with vaccination for meningococcal, Professor?
Meningococcal disease would only be controlled when we have routine vaccination for all children, but also for older teenagers. So were we to have routine paid-for vaccination under the immunisation program nationally, we would get better control of a disease that we know how to control safely. We just need to implement a vaccine.
B vaccination, where do you get it if it's not routinely given by the government through the National Immunisation Program? Where are we getting it and what should we expect?
Well, GPs are a great source of information. If a GP recommends vaccination to a family, they usually accept that. They want that, in fact. They want to know what their GP advises. GPs are a source not only of information, but also of application. That is to say, you can get a vaccine from them. If you don't get the vaccine from them, you can get a script, collect it from a pharmacy and bring it back to the GP and get immunised. It's a discussion that parents should have with the GP to better understand and be aware of the different types of meningococcal that ACYW is routinely protected against with vaccines, but not yet B. Only South Australia in Australia routinely vaccinates infants against B. That's proving successful, and maybe the rest of Australia will follow suit.
Who should be getting vaccinated? Who are those people at higher risk of meningococcal right across the A, C, W, Y and B range?
There are a number of important risk groups who are at higher risk of meningococcal disease. Infants are at the greatest risk, those under 2 years of age. People who do not have a spleen. Your spleen is very important in protecting you against meningococcal disease. There is a drug treatment that's given to some adults called eculizumab, which is a monoclonal antibody, and that does affect your protection, your complement system. And while I'm on the subject of complement, some people are born with a defect in their immune system of complement. Complement is really important in fighting meningitis. If you have a defect, you're at much higher risk. So those people too should be vaccinated. A couple of other risk groups, if you work in a laboratory, if you have HIV/AIDS, if you have general immunosuppression, may increase your risk of meningococcal too. Also, teenagers between 15 and 19 and even young adults in their early 20s would benefit from protection and prevention.
It's up to you. Great to have you here today, Professor. You've been passionate about these subjects for 30 years and I think Australia needs to say a big thanks.
Well, it's important. Meningitis is something that doctors fear, which now can be largely prevented. We just have to do it.
Yeah, thanks very much. If you've enjoyed Matter of Vax, please subscribe and share with your friends. You can also follow us on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more Matter of Vax podcast and video education on this and other vaccine-preventable diseases, visit www.ifa.org.au.
The Immunisation Foundation
of Australia is a non-profit working to save lives through education and advocacy for vaccine prevention of disease.
Immunisation Foundation of Australia. Supporting immunisation, saving lives.